Good morning. Welcome to the lecture 2 of this ongoing course on understanding and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, special focus on scope 1 and 2 emission reduction through building design and construction. In this lecture, we will quickly be looking at sustainable development and sustainable development goals. So, in the previous lecture, if you remember, we had clearly discussed about sustainability, the understanding of it, sustainable development, and how historically we came to a point to discuss about sustainable development and greenhouse gas emissions eventually. Here we will be looking at the three major turning points, or rather the events which placed on record and which put the world together and on a path towards achieving sustainable development. The three of these were, which we are going to discuss in this lecture, are Agenda 21, Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals, or what we know as SDGs. So, quickly, the intent of Sustainable Development Goals, or all these agendas and Millennium Development Goals together, they have been to end extreme poverty, reduce inequality and protect the planet by 2030. So, this is about SDG, but the ones previous to that, Agenda 21 and MDG, have also broadly aimed at that. Now, if you look at this intent, we are talking about ending extreme poverty, which means we are talking about having economic prosperity for everybody on this planet. Second, to reduce inequality, which implied social inequality. So, everybody should have equal access of resources, equal rights, equal benefits. So, this is what we are talking about as the second domain, which is society, and the third one, protect the planet by 2030. So, we are talking about the environmental aspects here. So, together SDGs aim at this triple bottom line, which is environment, economy and society. And these SDGs, MDGs or Agenda 21 are actually the implementation guideline. How? So, the basic premise of these is that anything that gets measured gets valued, and anything that is valued is also measured. So, if I know how am I doing, how am I performing on a particular indicator or a parameter, I am more likely to excel, do better, because I know how have I been doing. On the contrary, I might be doing good, but if I do not have a measured benchmark, there is less motivation, less impetus, and also the comparison, how we are supposed to do, that is not there. So, with this background in mind, these agendas and development goals, they had been formulated. Historically, a lot of events we had seen in the previous lecture also, but what we are focusing here is in 1976 there was this event conference called Habitat 1, where for the first time we realized that the urban habitat, the human habitat for that matter, has a direct impact on the environment. Now, think of a time, today you might be thinking, oh, it is so trivial, I know that, it is so evident, it is so common. We are talking about 50 years back when it was actually not common. There were not enough, there were not so many people, there were not so many cities, and the cities were smaller, and yet for the first time we started to realize that the human development of cities, of buildings, it has a direct impact on environment, and that was the discussion which initiated, followed by a lot of events in between. Brundtland report in 1987, 1992 Earth Summit, another Habitat conference in 1996, which was 20 years after the first one, and then the third one in 2016. Now, here we are talking about as the first agenda, Agenda 21 in 1992, which was proposed in the Earth Summit. So, we are talking about Agenda 21, which was proposed in 1992, and it was supposed to be, the goals were supposed to be achieved by 2000, and then in 2000 there was another set of goals known as Millennium Development Goals, which were to be achieved by 2015, and then in 2015 we had another set of goals which is currently ongoing, which is known as Sustainable Development Goals, which is supposed to be achieved by 2030. The deadline is 2030. Now, in 1992 we have already talked about the Rio Summit, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, which was held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. So, there for the first time we have already seen that the discussion on environment and development coming together and the impact of development on environment was identified, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it was established in Rio in 1992, and there was also the creation of Conference of Parties, which was agreed to be its supreme body, which would look after the progress, which would monitor the progress. Now, from there came out Agenda 21 after this UNCED conference of 1992, which was in Rio. Now, what is Agenda 21? It is a comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally and locally by organizations. So, as we had already seen in the previous lecture, we are talking about bringing everyone together for the same common cause, not just at a smaller level, not just at a local level, but at a global level. Everybody had to come together, which was, now this bringing together was carried out, the task was carried out by United Nations, where they brought the governments, the systems, major groups, stakeholders, everybody together. Now, this Agenda 21 was adopted by more than 178 governments, and it was a successful agenda, successful in the sense in terms of agreement. If we look at the overview, it was created in 1992. After that, the World Congress for Education and Communication on Environment and Development was it was held in Toronto in 1992 again. After that, UNESCO launched the project of Education for a Sustainable Future. So, year after year there have been events which continued the Agenda 21 further. Then there was again an international conference on population and development, which was held in Egypt. There they launched Environment and Population Education and Information for Human Development Project. Now, what we are seeing after this adoption of Agenda 21 is that there is more and more emphasis on bringing people and environment together. The discussion on that the needs of people, which is a growing number now, is having a direct impact on the environment, and how much are they. So, there were continuous events which followed after this 1992. Now, if we look at Agenda 21 and if we look at the contents of that, it has broadly been divided into 4 chapters. Now, 3 chapters are the 3 dimensions or the triple bottom lines. First one being the social and economic dimension. So, out of the 3 dimensions, the 2 dimensions social and economic, they have been dealt with in the first chapter. The second one has been dedicated for the discussion about conservation of environment. So, environment has taken a bigger seat here. Third one is strengthening the roles of major groups. First is identifying the stakeholders, identifying the major groups, and then strengthening them. And the last section is about means of implementation, how to implement, because that is something that was lacking, which is what we have seen in our common future also. And then it was taken 5 years after our common future was when this Agenda 21 was adopted. So, it took almost 5 years to start from our common future and propose this Agenda 21, and the major thing was how to implement that, how to bring people together, how to bring governments and systems and stakeholders together. So, this is what was discussed in Agenda 21. Very quickly looking at the challenges. So, they identified several challenges, but there were certain issues with Agenda 21, which is what we are discussing here. One problem was that they left out several industries, and for example, the most important ones are electricity and mining. There is no discussion of electricity and mining in Agenda 21, and also they divided the entire discussion in sectors, sector based discussions have been there. So, the initial idea was to bring everything together, and that is the whole concept of sustainability and sustainable development. But when they distributed the entire content into sector wise chapters, that kind of reduced the impact of integration, and that made it little less effective. So, that was something that Agenda 21 lagged. Here what has also been realized as an after effect of Agenda 21 is that while the production systems have significantly improved in efficiency, the consumption patterns have gone worse. That is what we see across the world. So, we are talking about 1992 to say 2022, that the production systems are becoming more and more efficient, but the way we are consuming, our consumption patterns, they have been declining day by day. There was a need, which was later realized, to address this issue too. And then this particular thing, the trend of consumption, is aided by the global production. So, while the production became efficient, the system became efficient, the quantities which were being produced, that followed the consumption pattern, and those were the challenges which were recognized. Now, if we look at the implementation of Agenda 21 at the local level, we have to start from organizing the running, training the rally teams, like training the stakeholders, increasing the participation of partners and citizens. Now, that is something which majority of the times policy making process forgets, or rather cannot engage in, because it is a time taking, it is a time consuming process, and a lot of times we leave out the citizens and the concerned stakeholders. Once that has been done, there is the concert has been organized of bringing everyone together. That is when we identify the issues, the shared diagnosis is what we say, and then define the strategic themes. Okay, what is the key strategy, what is the strategic theme which needs to be addressed, and then we make an action plan, apply it, measure its effectiveness, and go back to the same process, where after measuring the effectiveness, we come back to the stakeholder and say, okay, what change is necessary, what change is required to improve it even better. It is an it is a spiral which is supposed to go up, which is supposed to improve the whole thing. That is what was envisaged in Agenda 21 and probably all the development goals. But the problem with Agenda 21 remained that it did not address some of the key issues, some industries, and it also kind of put the discussions in different silos, and there was that made it little less effective. To an ultimate output of that remained that Agenda 21 was not achieved fully. The goal that was set initially was not achieved. It was supposed to be achieved by 2000 and it was not achieved by the given deadline. So, Millennium Development Goals were proposed. Now, Millennium Summit, as we have seen, was held in 2000 at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and from Agenda 21 the whole discussion was taken forward, how to achieve sustainable development through the world, across the world, and for that this Millennium Development Goal was proposed, and at this meeting 150 world leaders, they participated and they ratified the United Nations Millennium Declaration, which was further taken, or what we know as now Millennium Development Goals. Now, this Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, there are 8 Millennium Development Goals. First one is to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. 2 is to achieve universal primary education. 3, promote gender equality and empower women. 4th is to reduce child mortality. 5th is to improve maternal health. 6 is to combat HIV or AIDS, malaria and other diseases. 7 is to ensure environmental sustainability, and 8 is a global partnership for development. Now, if you look at the intent of Agenda 21 or SDG or MDG, which we have discussed right in the beginning, and you look at these 8 Millennium Development Goals, in each one there are several targets, but if you look at, this is what we are looking at here, these 8 development goals, we see that out of 8, 1 talks about environment. There is a greater emphasis on people, health, education, equality. Now, equality, we are especially focusing on vulnerable groups such as women separately, children separately, we are talking about health, we are talking about so largely social aspects. 5 out of 8 goals talk about social aspects, and one talks about the environment, one talks about economy in the sense again equity in economy where we are talking about eradicating extreme poverty, and one talks about global partnership, again bringing people together. So, very clearly through these goals and agendas we see that these are the 3 triple bottom lines which are discussed, and the fourth one remains integrating all of them. Now, the emphasis on each dimension continued to change. Here we are seeing that there is a greater emphasis on social aspect, social dimension, and less on environmental and economic dimension. When we move on to SDG, we will see that there is a changing focus. We will see that there is a slightly increased focus, not more than society or economy, but slightly increased focus than MDGs on environment. So, if we quickly look at Millennium Development Goals, the goal number 1, which was to eradicate extreme poverty, it has 3 targets. One was to halve the proportion of people whose daily income is less than $1.25, to achieve full and productive employment, and to halve the proportion of individuals suffering from hunger. So, these were the 3 targets which were set for to be achieved by 2015, and the baseline that was taken was 1990. The second development goal was to achieve universal primary education. So, the target was to ensure that children everywhere universally, they should be able to complete a full course of primary education. Third goal was to promote gender equality and empower women, and again there was one target to eliminate gender disparity in primary and secondary education. Fourth was to reduce child mortality, and the target was to reduce the under 5 mortality rate by 2/3 by 2015. Fifth one was to improve maternal health. So, the targets were to reduce maternal mortality ratio by 75% and to achieve universal access to reproductive health. Now, all these goals and the targets that have been set within required implementation of this policy, which was the 8th target and which was also the most important one. The 6th one was to combat diseases like HIV, AIDS, malaria and others. So, to have all these diseases by 2015 and to reverse the spread of HIV, AIDS, to achieve global access to treatment for HIV and AIDS, and to have seized and started reversal of the incidence of malaria and other major diseases. The 7th target was to ensure environmental sustainability. Now, though it was only one target out of the 8, one goal out of the 8 goals, it has 4 targets, and it is within one goal it has covered a wider ground. One was to integrate the principles of sustainable development into all nations' policies and programs. So, the targets are very broad and sometimes quantitative, sometimes qualitative. The idea was that every nation in its policy should have these policies and programs inbuilt to reduce biodiversity loss and achieve a substantial reduction in the rate of loss, to halve the proportion of the universal population without sustainable access to clean and safe drinking water and basic sanitation, to achieve substantial improvement in the lives of a minimum of 100 million slum dwellers by 2020. And the last one, which is one of the most important goals, is, so there are 6 targets in that. The first one was to develop an open, predictable, rule based, non-discriminatory trading and economic system. So, when we are talking about partnership for development, we are talking about partnering amongst the governments, countries at all different levels to achieve or to implement the policies that have been set. Now, here trade is one of the most important things for economies to grow equally and equitably. We need a lot of cooperation between governments and states. So, that was the first target. Second, to address the special needs of least developed countries. So, here it kind of put a greater responsibility, MDGs put a greater responsibility on the developed nations. So, it was like shared responsibility, equitably divided. So, developed countries which had the access to greater share of resources, they consumed greater share they also accelerated the growth. The development was more in the developed countries. The greater responsibility was put also on behalf of the less developed countries. So, there was an equitable responsibility which was there as a result of MDGs. At least the intention of the policy remained so. Again, to address the special needs of small island developing nations because of climate change, because of a lot of problems which we will come to, for example, rising sea levels. Several countries, several states are on the brink of extinction due to submergence, due to rising sea levels. Now, there is again the responsibility has been put on others to cater to address the special needs of these small island nations, to deal exhaustively with the debt problems of developing nations, to provide access to affordable essential drugs in the developing world, the availability of medicines, the facilities, and to avail benefits of new technologies, especially information and communications in collaboration with the private sector. So, this entire goal is talking about promoting collaborations, and a lot of policies, especially you would find that a lot of these developed countries, they have been through such targets and through such policies, they have been pushed, they have been asked to support and cooperate with the developing nations or the underdeveloped nations and help them in promoting trade, education, research development, science and technology development, and a lot of others. Now, quickly looking at the outcomes of Millennium Development Goals, because there were targets. So, the share of poor people actually reduced by 50% from the baseline of 1990 to 2015. Of course, we have seen that due to COVID coming into picture, a lot of this progress that had been made was reversed, but some of the targets were achieved. 90% of the children across the world we are talking about actually went to primary school, though they did not necessarily completed the primary education. And if we look at the implementation of all these policies in our own country, for example, in India, primary education in government schools is free. So, that was the impact, or that was how countries started to implement the programs. So, the goal was to have all children complete their primary education. How states would do it, how India did that was by providing free education to all children, the primary education would be free. So, this was a target which was not achieved fully, but significant improvement was there. The third target, where we were promoting gender equality and empowering women, was one of the targets was to have more number of boys and girls, equal number of boys and girls, and that was thankfully achieved again to the thanks to the policies like making the primary education free for everybody. Then reducing child mortality, 17,000 fewer children died each day. We are talking about each day 17,000 fewer children died than the baseline of 1990. This implied provisions of primary health care, of maternal health care, of neonatal health care in remote areas, in rural areas, because that is urban areas usually have a greater access to medicine and health facilities. That is what was achieved with the help of this. And if you would see in India, there were PHCs in rural areas which were set up, greater number. The doctors, when they were passing out from colleges, it was a mandatory internship for them to go in the rural areas and serve the rural health centers. So, such policies were implemented, put in place to achieve such targets. Maternity, improving maternity health care, again similar policies have been adopted, and the performance has been that maternal mortality fell by 45% since 1990, which is surely not 100% of the target, but a significant achievement there. Again, as per the numbers, fewer people got infected by HIV, AIDS and malaria, and beyond this, even if when the people got infected, they received better medical care, and medicines and medical care was available to the patients of such diseases. The seventh one was to ensure environmental sustainability. Now, if you remember, there were 4 different targets. One of them was to provide access to clean drinking water and sanitation facility. Clean drinking water was provided additionally to 2.3 billion people. Now, in India, the policies such as Swachh Bharat and others, where provision of drinking water to every household has been provided, is an implementation of the targets and goals which have been set in MDGs. So, every country, every state developed their own implementation mechanism to achieve the goal and the target. And the last one was a global partnership for development. So, here the debts they declined and the foreign aid was increased. So, what they did, they brought together the developed countries and the underdeveloping and underdeveloped countries, and there through a proper policy mechanism the more foreign funding was and more foreign aids were provided from the developed to the underdeveloped side, and hence the debts they decreased. So, this was the outcome of Millennium Goals. Now, here we see that significant progress has been made, but surely 100% progress could not be achieved by the deadline, which was 2015. So, in 2015 sustainable development goals were proposed, not in 2015, in 2012 again the Rio plus 20, which was after 20 years from the first Earth Summit. So, that was again organized in Rio de Janeiro, and that was the time when again when they were taking stock of the progress of MDGs, it was realized that by 2015 we will not be able to achieve the 100% targets, and hence new sustainable development goals or new goals have to be proposed. So, taking on from Agenda 21 to MDG, new sustainable development goals were proposed. There is a set of 17 goals that have been proposed. So, 8 goals and few more goals have been adopted. Total 17 goals have been proposed in SDGs as SDGs. First one is no poverty, 2 zero hunger, 3 good health and well-being, 4 quality education, 5 gender equality, 6 clean drinking water and sanitation, 7 affordable and clean energy. Now, this was an addition from the previous one. So, some goals have been split into 2 and some new goals have been adopted. For example, affordable and clean energy. So, it is not just affording, being able to afford the energy, but also development of clean energy. So, a lot of push towards this is a new this thing. Then decent work and economic growth. 9 is industry, innovation and infrastructure. Now, this is again something which was missing in the Millennium Development Goals. There was a greater focus on people, health and well-being, but less on amenity provision. How will people stay healthy and happy is through provision of good infrastructure. Then reduced inequalities. So, we are talking about economic inequalities as well as social inequalities. Then another very interesting component that had been added, which was again a recognition, was sustainable cities and communities. It was clearly identified, and since 1976 it was in discussion from the Habitat 1 conference that urban environment and the built environment of humans has a direct impact on the environment. Yet none of the goals, Agenda 21 or MDG, discussed directly about how the cities, how the urban areas should be shaped. So, SDG now has a specific goal on sustainable cities and communities, where we are promoting development of sustainable cities and communities. 12th is responsible consumption and production. So, the failure of Agenda 21 was that we were talking about responsible production, but not responsible consumption. Now, here in SDG, this has again been realized that we need to alter, we need to improve our consumption patterns, and that is what has been included as one of the goals, goal number 12, responsible consumption as well as production both. 13 is climate action. So, while this an inconvenient truth and similar documentaries and discussion about climate change established that climate change is for real, there needed to be a goal which specifically discusses about the climate goal. Then life below water. So, we are specifically talking, again this is an extension to the climate change and climate action, that we realize that seas, oceans are an important balancing factor in this entire discussion on climate change and sustainable development. So, there is a specific goal only talking about life below water. So, we are talking about aquatic life system. We are also talking about life on land, because again if you look at MDGs, we are talking about only people, human health, well-being, we are talking about economy for humans, we are talking about environment, that too for the benefit of humans. Nowhere did we discuss about flora and fauna. Where and how will we actually address those if we do not even have that as a goal, as a target? So, another goal has been set, which is life on land. So, these two, life below water and life on land, actually take care of the issues concerning flora and fauna, the environment largely. Then 16th one is peace, justice and strong institutions. We are talking about peace, justice, and then once it has been established, accepted as a goal, we will be talking about the policies, how it can be achieved. And then we are talking about partnerships for the goals. So, from MDGs, the horizon has been expanded, the more and more issues they have been brought into the discussion. The old ones have not really been left out at all. The triple bottom line remains the same, but it has become more and more exclusive and more comprehensive. Very quickly, if you go through each of these individual sustainable development goals, each goal has been divided into targets, which is how we have seen in MDGs. So, for example, the first goal of no poverty has been divided into 7 different targets. One, for example, eradicate extreme poverty. The second target is reduce poverty by at least 50%. So, this is one target, the 3 parts of that, and implement social protection systems. So, this is what this is how the targets have been divided. If you look at the 4th target here, equal rights to ownership, basic services, technology and economic resources, under which we will have several housing schemes. I am talking about the implementation and policies towards achievement of these targets is provision of housing schemes for the underprivileged, for the poor people. So, such policies are implementation of that. Build resilience to environmental, economic and social disasters. Now, this is another very interesting target within no poverty, because whenever there is any disaster of any type, social, economic or environmental, the most vulnerable ones are the ones in the bottom. They could be socially vulnerable, they could be economically vulnerable, but the people who are at the bottom of this entire hierarchy within the community are the ones who are most vulnerable and they are the most exposed ones. So, having institutions and policies in place to build resilience to environmental, economic and social disasters, that they do not get affected, that has to be the base, the bottom line. Similarly, each goal has been divided into targets. Zero hunger, so the target is universal access to safe and nutritious food, and like that different targets have been formulated. Good health and well-being, so here we can see the maternal health. Earlier maternal health was a separate goal itself, here maternal health separately, the death of children under 5 years of age, all that has been put within this. So much so that we are also talking about reducing road injuries and deaths. This is all in good health and well-being, overall well-being, the preventing and treating substance abuse, implementing WHO framework on tobacco control. So, all of that which concerns human health and well-being, they have been put as targets here. Quality education, again we will see free secondary and primary education, equal access to primary education, eliminate all discrimination in education. So, allowing the privileged children or differently abled children to be educated within the same education system and them having access is another target. Gender equality, ending discrimination against women and girls, ending all the violence, providing them with equal opportunities. All of these different targets have been set under gender equality. Clean water and sanitation, which is the 6th goal, has targets such as increase water use efficiency and ensure fresh water supplies. So, till now we have not really talked about efficiencies. Now, we are also talking about the efficiencies. Then affordable and clean energy, which is the new one. We are talking about one, universal access to modern energy, and we are talking about increasing the share of renewable energy and similar targets here. Decent work and economic growth. So, we are talking about sustainable economic growth, but we are also talking about education and training to the youth to be employed and to be skilled. We are talking about equal and full and decent work employment to all people, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their capabilities. So, this is what we are talking about in decent work. Industry, innovation and infrastructure, upgrading of all industries and infrastructure for sustainability is what we are talking about as a target here. Resilient infrastructure development, inclusive development is the concern here. Reducing the inequalities. So, again we are talking about reducing income inequalities. We are talking about reducing social inequalities by promoting social inclusion. We are talking about equal opportunities and ending the discrimination. So, not just economic, but economic and social reduction of inequalities is what this point covers. Under sustainable cities and communities, we are talking about safe and affordable housing, we are talking about transport systems, sustainable urbanizations, and along with that we are also talking about protecting the culture and heritage, which we have not discussed so far, which implies that we are surely moving forward, because our subjects, our targets are becoming more and more sophisticated, they are becoming more and more sympathetic and empathetic. We are talking about literally everything, which means we are making a progress beyond the mandatory where we started from. Then we are talking about responsible consumption and production, and like that you will have all the targets, all the goals and their respective targets. In climate action, we are talking about building knowledge and capacity also to meet climate change. Now that it is inevitable, how do we meet it? How do we build resilience to meet is also under the same. Life below water, we are talking about sustainable fishing, we are talking about coastal and marine areas, and all others which affect the oceans and the aquatic life. In life on land, we are talking about restoring the terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems, we are talking about reducing and rather ending deforestation, we are talking about ensuring the conservation of mountain ecosystems. So, identify different ecosystems and also identifying the fact that all these ecosystems need to be conserved for a sustainable development of the entire world. Under peace, justice and strong institutions, we are talking about effective and transparent institutions, strong institutions. We are talking about protecting children and women from abuse and exploitation, trafficking. We are also talking about promoting the rule of law. So, there have to be rules and laws in each country and also collectively as a world together. And the last one is partnering for the goals, which is again very important, just like in MDGs, and we are talking about bringing everything together, promoting technology and cooperation, promoting trade, promoting enhancing the strength of institutions, bringing in new organizations and institutions. Now, with such a detailed work, and we still have time, we still have another 7 years to reach the deadline, there is a lot of progress that is going on these sustainable development goals, and we are hopeful that collectively the world together can reach the goal of sustainable development. You can go to the website where of United Nations, where sustainable development goals are being monitored, and you can check how have we been doing on sustainable development goals, each target. So, starting from 2015 and today we are in 2023, almost half the year has passed. So, how much progress have we made in these 7.5 years is what you will find on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal website. So, thank you very much for joining me in this lecture. See you again in the next lecture. Thank you.